Okay, so let's jump into the process of being able to make a mock-up on something that has that sort of forced perspective where you need to put it onto a space that is not perfectly flat in perspective. It's got something that's sort of angling backwards into space. What's the process to be able to get that to line up? The first thing we want to do is go ahead and make a rectangle. So it's going to start a similar process. Now this one is a little bit of a thinking challenge. I'm going to go ahead and select my rectangle tool, which is U. The reason I say this is a thinking challenge when you're setting up your first rectangle is we need it to be about the shape of the billboard in this case, as if it were flat. So we needed to make sure it's kind of in that amount of shape. And honestly, it's probably pretty similar to like the full kind of width of whatever this composition is. So I'm going to say maybe about like that shape. Looks pretty good for scale and size of what this shape is, what this billboard would look like if it were flat, if we were standing like directly in front of it and can see it, you know, in a normal view way. So we need to go ahead and create a shape that is flat first. I've got a shape there. The next step is to go ahead and make this a smart object. So you need to make sure you make the smart object before you transform the shape. So before we try to put it into perspective, make sure it is a smart object first. I'm going to right click and choose convert to smart object. What that allows me to do then is I can go ahead and put my artwork in there. That might be helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the thumbnail to add my art. There's my rectangle.psb. This is that magically saved file, just sort of in a sort of back end location of the computer so that I can save that stuff and make it linked to the original file. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the white background for now, and then let me find the type poster that I want to throw in here. And since my type poster is a little bit of like a, you know, vertical square, I'm going to go ahead and just turn this one because it'll fit that way. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this one into my composition here. Oops, it is super tiny. What happened? Did I skip a step? Do you guys remember? My image size. Do you guys remember that? Image size. Let me back up. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to close this. Don't save it. I'm going to get rid of this rectangle because it's going to be a different scale. I'm going to back up here. Remember, I need to go to image and image size first. Because automatically, yeah, there it is. 76-inch size image. I don't need it to be quite that big. I do want it to still be 72 resolution. I'm not going to try and print this because I know I'm not going to try and print it. I'm just going to downscale the image to be a smaller size. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this to like 25 by 16. That's fine. Go ahead and click OK. If I wanted to crop this to be for Instagram, I could go ahead and crop it, you know, into a square. So C on my keyboard, I've got it already set to ratio 1:1. That'll make it a square. I could sort of offset this just a little bit by sort of dragging it over this way. I kind of like having just a little hint of that palm tree in that. Go ahead and click OK there. That's a better composition. Now I can go ahead and make my rectangle again. Make sure it is, whoops, U on my keyboard, click and drag. Make sure I'm getting a rectangle. It's about the same scale or size of this composition in the perspective. Get rid of the rounded corners here. And I will go ahead and right click, choose convert to smart object, and then go back to my smart object space here by double clicking on the thumbnail. What I want to do is turn the eye off on my rectangle, go ahead and drag and drop my artwork into here. It should be a much bigger size now. Yep, much better. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this because I sort of want it to be, you know, landscape view instead of portrait. I'm going to scale this up just a little bit. It's okay if you got to scale it up sometimes. Just try to make sure it doesn't get too pixelated. Let me see if I can get this to sort of center up in my composition. Here we go. Enter if I like where that positioning is. It's pretty good there. So I'm going to say that's good to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command S to save. Again, just regular save, regular old Command S save or Control S save. You don't want to save as, you don't want to save as a copy. And that means my artwork should be, yep, ready to go into my original document. Then the next step that you want to use is if you go to the Edit menu, you're going to go down to Transform, and this feature right here, Distort. Distort is the feature that we use to get it to go into perspective. The reason is because when you click and drag on the corners, you can see that it starts to sort of like lean that backwards or lean that forwards, depending on which direction you go. So I want to try and line this up to the corners of my billboard here. So let me try to zoom in and take a look. See if I can get that to sort of match the perspective there. So far that's working pretty well right there. I might go ahead and hit enter once, and then actually what I need to probably do is zoom in much closer so I can make sure I'm lining up the corners exactly where I want them to go. So I'll go back to that edit, transform, and distort it again. And there's the edge of my billboard. Make sure it's a little bit more overlapped than I need it to be so I can mask out any corners or edges. Make sure that overlaps there and here on the bottom as well. Pretty good. It was okay. Since this is a white billboard and most of my artwork is also kind of white, I can just switch this blending mode to multiply. And that may be all that I really need to do to get it to sort of fit in. Now I would be ready to go ahead and do some of my adjustment layers to add just, tweak the photo a little bit so that it has a nice presentation. I could do levels. It does sort of look like the artwork is maybe a little bit digital. So if I brighten up the artwork a little bit, it may look a little bit more realistic that way. Soften it a little bit. Let's do color balance. Shadows, highlights, midtones. And again, if I make room for this window to be a little bit larger here, I want to be paying attention to my photo while doing these color changes. So I'm doing shadows, swinging back and forth. I'm not looking at where I'm clicking and dragging. I'm looking at the photograph. It's pretty good there. Don't want it to be too green, but I don't want the shadows to be too red either. Sometimes bluing or adding a little bit of purple to your shadows can be useful to make them, just give them a little bit more color. But I think cooler colors in the shadows certainly make sense. For my midtones, I'll go ahead and adjust those slightly as well. Subtle changes. And then highlights. I don't want my sort of wider areas to be colored too much, but sometimes adding a little bit of yellow can be useful. Those highlights looking good. So there it was before and after. A little bit better, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one. This one will be ready to go. Again, that feature that we wanted to pay attention to was creating a rectangle with a smart object, double clicking on the thumbnail of the smart object to open up where you can add in your artwork, do regular save to save your stuff. Go ahead and go back to your composition, and then you want to choose on the layer that has the rectangle, edit, transform, and distort. And that should allow you to help, or sort of help you get it into perspective. If you're doing something that is like cloth-like, you may then go ahead and add one more feature to that, which is the liquefy filter, which will allow you to create realistic sort of wrinkles and things. You can match the wrinkles on the shirt or sweatshirt or whatever you're trying to mock up into. Cool. All right, let me pause there. There was an additional question on how do I get something to sort of look like it's wrapped around something with these mockups. So this mug here would be a useful one. This may be a little bit of a two-step process, but great question. I want to make sure it sort of aligns to that. It needs to look like it's wrapped around something. So a method to be able to do this is going to use the edit menu and transform. And instead of distort, we want to try and use this warp feature. The warp feature looks very similar to the distort, except that it also gives me some rounded edges on the corners. So what I can do here is sort of line up on those cornered edges. I'll just do the edges first, sort of get them to line up to the cup in perspective. And then I can adjust the angles of the handlebars of where those sit as well. So you can see here, this one is sort of like angling in a particular direction. This is angling in a direction. And that's going to allow me to sort of match the shape of the cup, which I can't quite see very good underneath this, but there we go. And that can help make it look bubbled in the center. And actually there's a little of a trick to make it look bubbled in the center that I'll show you once I get these edges lined up correctly. This may also need to be combined with a blending mode. It might also need to be combined with a mask to make sure that the edges look crisp on the edge of the cup too, right? I mean, some of these cornered edges on the rectangle are straight and sort of harsh edge. Some of the edges of the cup are very round. So to match those, we may need a little bit of some masking to help us. And then additionally, do you guys see these handlebars in the center? If I pull those handlebars closer together, they're going to make it sort of pinch or bubble in the center. So that is going to help my design look like it is on a rounder surface and sort of flatter in the other areas. So do you see the mesh that pops up every time I sort of click and hold down on one of these handlebars? That can be a good indication if you are getting kind of the kind of perspective that you want on the mug. And then I'll go ahead and, or the cup rather than the mug, but go ahead and multiply that because I want to get rid of those white pixels. That actually does a majority of the work for me into aligning this to the cup because I had some decent white borders on the outside edge of it. Makes it much easier for me to line up where that blue starts and stops. There's sort of my cup design so far. Picking up a little bit of that cup texture, which is nice. I maybe need to go back and warp it again, to sort of mess with it a little bit. A lot of times I find I need to like do it from a distance far enough away so I can sort of get a feel for it and then actually go in and sort of adjust some of the details. Let me just pull on these handlebars a little bit until it seems like it's fitting on and looks like it's sort of wrapped around. And again, I think you can see with those lines on the top, at least, where they seem much more rounded. It's kind of giving me a good indication that it's sort of printed on a mug in that space. Just might need to make sure that it looks rounded enough. You can also click and drag on the artwork directly if you want to sort of lift or tuck or reposition any parts of the image. So warp is a really useful tool for being able to create these kinds of mock-ups and things. And, you know, again, you could grab, you know, like a Starbucks mug or whatever and like take your own picture of it and then just sort of like mask out the areas that you don't want to include their logo, and you could add in some other piece of information. But that looks pretty good right there. Enter. There's sort of my mug sleeve. It's pretty good, not too bad. So I would save that one. I might add, well, I might add a couple, you know, adjustment layers or something to it, but I'm ready to go ahead and save that one and export it as a JPEG. All right, I'm going to stop recording now.